I think about, man, I have to perform songs every single night or every other night.
There is a moment in every performer's life when the curtain stops being a place to hide behind. When the lights go down and the crowd goes quiet and the only thing left is the truth. For Bruno Mars, that moment came at 39. Not on a stage. Not in a Grammy speech. Not in a carefully worded press release drafted by a team of publicists. It came slowly, quietly, through a series of confirmations that had been years in the making. Things fans had whispered about for a decade. Things the internet had debated through thousands of threads and comment sections. Things Bruno himself had laughed off, deflected, or simply refused to address. Until now. To understand what he confirmed, you have to understand who Bruno Mars actually is. Not the performer with the gold tux and the flawless falsetto. Not the guy who can moonwalk, shred a guitar solo, and hit a note so clean it sounds computer-generated, all in the same song. You have to go back to the very beginning. Back to Honolulu. Back to a little boy named Peter Gene Hernandez, born on October 8, 1985, into a family where music was not a hobby. It was survival. His father, Peter Hernandez Sr., was a Latin percussion player who had relocated from Brooklyn to Hawaii. His mother, Bernadette, was a singer and dancer from the Philippines. Together they ran a family entertainment act in Waikiki, performing for tourists night after night. Their children were part of the show almost from birth. But it was the youngest boy, the one with the thick dark hair and the eyes that seemed to hold every song he had ever heard, who stood out. He began performing at 4 years old. By 5, he was already being called Little Elvis, wearing a tiny glitter jumpsuit, shaking his hips, and selling it to audiences who had paid good money to be entertained and left feeling like they had witnessed something that could not be explained. By the time he turned 10, he had performed nearly 1,000 shows. That is not a childhood. That is a career. And understanding that fact is the first step to understanding everything that came after. When his parents divorced at 12, the structure that had held his early life together simply collapsed. There was no more family act. No more stage. No more steady income. His father tried to hold things together, but the reality was brutal. There were nights spent in a beat-up Cadillac. There were nights on rooftops in Waikiki. There were nights inside an abandoned bird zoo where the only sounds were peacocks crying in the dark. They snuck into hotel pools just to wash up. They ate spam musubi from convenience stores. For 5 months, there was no electricity in their living space. Bruno practiced guitar by moonlight because there were no amps, no outlets, and no alternatives. At school, he was a kid in the thrift store clothes getting laughed at by classmates who had no idea he had already performed for thousands of people. So he did what he knew how to do. He performed. He made $75 a night impersonating Michael Jackson at local venues, saved every dollar, and poured it into demo tapes. This is the part of Bruno Mars that most people never saw. The part that was forged not in studios or sold-out arenas but in genuine hardship. And for years, he kept it close. He rarely talked about it in interviews. He kept things light, kept things cool, kept things focused on the music. He had a reputation to maintain. He was Bruno Mars. He did not do vulnerability. Then came the rumors. And they changed everything. The first wave had been circling for years before they finally crested. People in Las Vegas had always talked. The city runs on whispers. And the whisper that kept coming back around was that Bruno Mars had a serious gambling problem. Not a casual one. Not the kind where you lose $100 at a slot machine and laugh it off. A real one. The kind that follows a person from room to room in a casino and does not let go. Bruno had hinted at this himself, years before anyone made a big story out of it. In separate conversations over the years, he had mentioned that he got into gambling before he was old enough to be anywhere near a casino. That he had lost everything in a poker game once. That Vegas had a way of getting into your blood. These were offhand comments, almost throwaway lines, buried inside longer interviews about music and touring. But people remembered them. And when the story broke in March 2024 claiming that he owed approximately $50 million to MGM Resorts and was essentially working off his debt through his Park MGM residency, those old comments suddenly felt like evidence. The internet did not wait for facts. Within hours of the original report airing on News Nation, the story had taken on a life of its own. Gossip platforms ran with the number without verifying a single source. Reddit exploded. Talk show hosts repeated it on air. One prominent sports commentator told his audience that Bruno had once lost $17 million at a blackjack table in a single night. There was no confirmation of that figure. It did not matter. The image was too compelling to resist. A man who sang about being richer than rich, who wore gold suits and dripped charisma from every pore, secretly drowning in casino debt. It was the kind of story that practically writes itself. MGM Resorts responded quickly and without ambiguity. Their statement to Forbes and Billboard was direct. There was no debt. Their relationship with Bruno Mars was built on mutual respect, and they considered him one of the greatest performers in the world. Their stock price did not move. Wall Street believed them. Major outlets eventually ran the correction. But corrections never travel as fast as the original story. The $50 million rumor had already become part of how a certain portion of the public thought about Bruno Mars. And then he did something nobody expected. He confirmed it. Not the debt, which MGM had already denied. Not the specific number. But the gambling. The real thing underneath the rumor. He confirmed that it had been a part of his life. That Vegas had gotten to him at certain points. That there had been times when the money he was earning disappeared faster than it was coming in. He did not stand at a podium. He did not release a statement. He confirmed it the way Bruno Mars confirms everything. Through performance, through humor, through the kind of honesty that is delivered with a grin but lands like a gut punch. During a show at Park MGM in April 2024, he looked out at a packed house and said with a straight face that ever since they said he owed $50 million, his phone had gone quiet. He wanted to know where his friends were when things got heavy. The crowd laughed. The clip went everywhere. 6.8 million views on TikTok in a single day. A few months later, when Spotify announced he had reached 150 million monthly listeners, he reposted it with a caption about keeping the streams coming because he needed to get out of debt. When he appeared on stage with Rosé at Sophie Stadium, his opening line to the crowd was almost out of debt. Each joke was a confirmation wrapped in comedy. He was saying, yes, this thing you have heard about me is real, but I am still standing, still laughing, still performing. It was the most Bruno Mars way possible to address something deeply personal. He had spent his whole life performing through pain. This was no different. But the gambling was not the only rumor that had been circling. There was Jessica. Jessica Cabon, the woman he had been with for over 13 years. They met in the spring of 2011 at a hotel restaurant in New York City. She had just come from a modeling audition. He had just come off stage. By multiple accounts, he saw her and simply stopped moving. They talked until 2 in the morning. Within a year, she had left everything behind and moved across the country to be with him. She slept on an air mattress while he toured the world. They built something real together over the years. A home in Studio City. A dog. A life that existed almost entirely outside of the public eye. In 13 years together, she appeared on only 3 red carpets. 3. Bruno never brought her up unless someone asked directly. When he did mention her, it was brief. He called her his rock once and then moved on to the next question. People had speculated for years that something had shifted between them. The signs started appearing in late 2024. Her anniversary posts, which she had made consistently, were suddenly gone. Bruno was photographed alone in Tokyo wearing a gold necklace she had given him, but turned backward so her initials were hidden against his chest. Then came a comment on one of her social media posts in January 2025. A fan asked directly if she and Bruno had separated. Her response was 15 words. She said she would always celebrate and be happy for all of his continued achievements. Cheering from afar. 15 words. And they confirmed what nobody had been able to prove. The internet dissected every syllable. She had spent Christmas with her family in San Juan. He had performed New Year's Eve in Las Vegas. It was the first December they had spent apart in over a decade. Sources said they were living separate lives. Others said he had tried to fix things. Neither of them gave a formal statement. They never confirmed a breakup publicly. But those 15 words said everything that a formal statement would have said and more, because they were real. There was no publicist behind them. There was no careful crafting. It was a woman being gracious in the face of something painful, and everyone recognized it immediately. Bruno never directly addressed the split. But here too, if you listened closely to his music from that period, you could hear something shifting. A rawness that had not always been there. He had always been an extraordinary craftsman. But craftsmen can hide behind technique. What came through in his more recent work was something less polished and more human. Something that sounded less like a man performing and more like a man processing. The third confirmation was the most personal of all. It was the one he had carried longest. The childhood. Not the charming version he had told in interviews over the years, the little Elvis story, the family act, the kid who was born to perform. The fuller version. The version with the abandoned zoo and the peacock screaming in the dark and the guitar practice by moonlight and the thrift store clothes and the Spam Musubi dinners. At 39, he began letting that version out. Not all at once. Not in a single confession. But piece by piece, in ways that suggested he had finally made some kind of peace with it. He talked about what it meant to perform 1,000 shows before the age of 10. What that builds inside a person. The discipline, Yes. The instinct for reading a crowd, absolutely. But also the weight of it. The way it can make performance feel less like a choice and more like the only thing you know how to be. He talked about what the divorce did to his family. What it felt like to go from being little Elvis in front of 40,000 people at a football halftime show to a kid sleeping in a car with nowhere to go. He talked about the years in Los Angeles when he was 18 and broke and had nothing but 3 demo CDs and a name he had picked for himself, Bruno Mars, written on a luggage tag. He talked about eating 99-cent tacos for weeks because there was nothing else. About lying his way into a DJ job he did not know how to do. About being dropped by Motown after 9 months without a single released song and having to call his family back home and explain what had happened.